Hey, Jordan, long time no speak.
Hey, Daniel, how's it going?
Jordan, it's funny. We usually talk a lot off air, but we've both been so busy. So, we didn't even talk before the show. I have so much I want to ask you. I have an article coming out today, kind of putting NATO and Trump's comments to, obviously Angela Merkel, the French president, Theresa May, and the chief of NATO, and this whole brouhaha that he's being rude, going overseas, bashing allies and everything. And I wanted to give people a perspective that Trump's beef, which really should be all of our concern, is not just, we're shouldering a bigger burden. It's that, what are we shouldering it for? What is NATO? What's the purpose of it, 69 years later, when the consummate threats of our time have changed, and to the extent that they're related to Russia, which they somewhat are, with Russia in the background throwing crap in the game, helping China, helping the Iranians, these people are downright on the other side of it. So, I guess, Jordan, the analogy I want to start off with is, if I'm stronger than you, you're my little brother, and I say, look, I'll protect you. I'm happy to do it. But then I see you slitting your wrist, and I see you letting in the bad guys in your neighborhood into your house, and I see you collaborating with the bad guys to sabotage me trying to help you. I'm like, screw it. I mean, isn't that what Trump is kind of telling them?
Yeah, there comes a point in time where you need to deliver a firm message to the Europeans to, get out of bed with Putin and the Iranian regime and stop these multi-billion-dollar trade deals. And we've been, the Trump White House has been warning months now that this was going to happen. So for this, I'm sure everyone's read about the media's outrage about, how dare President Trump call out the NATO alliance like this. It's not like our members of NATO should have been surprised by what was about to happen when President Trump arrived in Brussels earlier this week and said, you guys need to pay your debts and stop screwing us and helping out our adversaries. That shouldn't have been a surprise at all, because the messaging was consistent the whole time. Germany especially has become a particularly rogue nation when it comes to NATO. Not only do they not pay their fair share towards collective security, as a very wealthy nation, they just prefer to use their money, or their government money, for social safety nets and, giving housing to Afghan and Syrian migrants, and, pretending that there isn't a massive migration crisis that's threatening the long-term stability of their entire country. Germany is ignoring all of that. And at the same time, they're also empowering Russia with this huge gas pipeline deal, where Russia is going to have so much leverage over them in the near future that they will have a say over basically anything that they do in the trade world, which is bad, of course, because NATO was formed to stop Russian aggression, and our Eastern European partners are very concerned still about Russian aggression. So Germany is really betraying the alliance. It's not the United States, it's Germany, and it's 20 other member states that are refusing to pay for their collective defense, while also empowering Iran. So we're dealing with all of that right now.
Wow, so there's a lot to digest there. And again, this bothers me. Even people like Ben Sass, they bash the president. Now you're attacking NATO. They have this nostalgic view from the Reagan era, and they don't understand that Trump is actually doing the Reagan strategy of today. So it was created in 1949. Basically, what happened? You had the UN, which was created to stop, people like Hitler, but then it became very apparent, like within a year, that Germany was a defeated, battered people. They're done with. So they're not the threat. It was the rise of the Soviet Union and Stalin. So NATO was created in 1949 to ensure they don't invade Europe. And, it worked very well up until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. You fast forward now and you look at Europe and America, and the consummate threat of our time is jihad. Jihad embodied through Iran and Hezbollah. And to the extent the Sunnis are a problem, it's really like we've spoken about so much on the show. It's really through self-immolation, through bringing them in, allowing them to establish cells on your shores. And that's the problem. And to the extent that Russia is a threat, which you and I are very hawkish on that, they are a threat. A big part of it is their, surreptitious enabling of the Islamists. And by the way, Turkey, enabling of Turkey. And Turkey's in NATO now. So we got the fifth column in. So a couple things here. So like you said, it's not just that they're putting only like 1% of GDP, whereas Poland is putting like 2% of GDP, and they're much poorer country, putting 2% to NATO. But Russia would be nothing but a crap hole if not for their oil and gas exports. Now, so could you explain a little bit what's going on here? That basically, Ben Sasse is saying, oh, you're trashing NATO and helping Russia. But really, like Trump told Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, on Wednesday, he said, quote, we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia. And I think that's very inappropriate. Don't we now have record levels of exports, of gas exports? And rather than them, using us, they're building this Nord Stream pipeline with Russia.
Yeah, that's the least that we could ask the Europeans to do, especially because, as you said, one of the fundamentals of objectives of NATO is to stop Russian aggression, and by building up a collective defense deterrent to do so. And of course, Russia, there's not much innovation there. They have a declining population. There's a lot of economic woes, but their one bailout package comes in the form of trade deals over natural resources, right? So I think the president was absolutely right, even if his motivation, and he did not say directly that you should stop trading with Russia and only trade with the U.S. He just said, stop trading with Russia. Of course, it would benefit our allies, and it would be nice of them to engage in bilateral deals with us, especially because we pay for their defense, right? So it kind of makes sense that they owe us on that one. But the fact that Germany is just completely, and it's sad too, because it's not just Merkel, it's the German public as a whole that has been, it's basically like I don't want to bash the Germans, but it's basically, it's a difficult psychological experiment. And they're still feeling this guilt complex from World War II while simultaneously moving further to the left, and also at the same time absorbing migrants that are probably going to, destroy the country. So there's all kinds of things going on. They're becoming more and more anti-American. And, the president, if we continue down this trajectory with the president saying nothing, nothing was going to change. So I don't get the critiques by, John Kerry, Ben Sasse saying, oh, you can't stir the pot in NATO, because NATO isn't doing anything for us right now, right? So we don't protect and defend the institution of NATO for no reason. We do it so we can share the burden of defending our mutual allies. It shouldn't be the United States going at it alone. So it just makes no sense that, people who say it's wrong to critique NATO. No, now is definitely the time to critique NATO.
No, exactly. And this is what I don't understand from some of the Never Trump crowd. And look, you and I are eager to criticize anyone that violates conservative principles, including Trump. But, and we'll get to his comments about Putin later. But for now, I mean, if you're a Ben Sasse conservative, so as a conservative, you should be very much upset by what Germany, France, England, Belgium, all these governments are doing with Israel, trashing Israel, supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, supporting Turkey, Erdogan inside of NATO as a NATO member that, pursuant to Article 5 of NATO's charter, we would have to defend them. They are the consummate threat for which we should have a NATO. Do nothing about that. Then flood their country with all these problems. Caroline Glick has a good column in the Jerusalem Post, her latest column, about a major terror attack that was foiled, luckily, against this big, anti-Iranian government protest this opposition movement, Iranian opposition movement in Paris. They were going to blow up the rally. I know Giuliani went there. Stephen Harper was there. Some other dignitaries. This was a big deal. And she reports that the cell, there was a whole cell out of Belgium that was operating there, led by Asdullah Assadi, who is basically a Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force guy, operating on their shores. So they brought the problem in, and then while they're operating there, so I want you to talk a little bit about a couple days before Trump got there. See, the media starts in the middle of the story, like he's just dumping on the Europeans. They held a meeting in Vienna at that same posh, hotel where they hatched the Iran deal, and they sit down. The foreign minister, what's her name? Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign minister, German, French, British foreign minister, sat down with Zarif and the Iranian president, and by the way, the Chinese and yes, the Russian foreign minister, to sabotage American sanctions on Iran. They're the ones destroying NATO.
Yeah, they're on the completely wrong side, and Federica Mogherini, she is potentially one of the most evil diplomats in the world. She sides with every adversary and enemy of America out there, whether it's the Arab-Israeli conflict and her, cozying up to Hamas or the Iranian regime. She is awful, and it represents the horrors of the European Union and what a big Euro state would look like in the future. It would be totally capitulating to terrorist regimes, dictatorships, almost kind of like the United Nations as one block, right? So, so a few days before the president arrived in Europe, there was that big foiled terrorist attack, and what these intelligence agencies in Europe and the United States are finding is that Iran again is ramping up its intelligence operations overseas. And you can't forget that, the Iranian regime believes in the same philosophy, well, a Shiite version of the philosophy of basically ISIS. So it shouldn't at all come as a surprise that they decide to change tactics. And there are signs that they are doing that now to conduct foreign assassination plots in the form of terrorist attacks. This is a terrorist regime committed to an annihilationist ideology, and that was one foiled plot. But almost every day now we're reading that an Iranian diplomat or so-called diplomat has been expelled from a European embassy. And that's why it's so important that the president spoke out about Iran, is because you see the trajectory they're moving in. I think under Obama, they thought that they could swindle him into, and they did, because they got $150 billion from him. But now that they realize that they're not getting anything from Trump, you have internal turmoil in Iran. The regime desperately needs a win. So it looks like they might be turning to terrorism. So it's definitely a very important time to, unite against the Iranian regime.
But it's bizarre that they're simultaneously attacking the Europeans, right? They were literally going to blow up this event at this thing at Paris, and again, this was not an ISIS-led. They're usually not even led, but inspired or a Sunni terrorism. This was a Quds Force cell doing it while they were sitting down, while the same Europeans were not just appeasing Iran, but plotting with them to circumvent the sanctions. My understanding is that basically, if you could just explain a little bit how it works, that we sanction the European banks and companies that do business with Iranian oil. So they're just trying to get around it with direct money transfers?
Yeah, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to cut out some kind of side deals and really focus on the specifics of the coming sanctions regime. And I think there's more sanctions that are being rolled out on a weekly basis. But it looks really bad when they're plotting when these European governments are plotting with the Iranians. But luckily, the European private sector is getting in line because they don't want to lose business with the United States. So the issue that we have at hand is these European state promoted or state-backed agencies, like these big airliners or big oil and gas companies. These are the companies that we need to focus on because they have, an assist from these European governments to try to skirt sanctions. But again, if U.S. sanctions policy is tough enough, and the indications are that the Trump administration is very serious about boxing in Iran, that the Europeans will basically have no choice to fall in line. So, of course, that's something to push for moving forward.
So, that's the thing. On net, I criticize the president every week if I think he's off message on something, but I actually think he was very on message this week that, typically, even if for example, let's say we have an ally and they just have left-wing domestic policy, it's just not appropriate to go overseas and start criticizing their policy. But in this case, today in particular, the news is about this interview with the UK Sun while he was visiting England. And he basically criticized their leadership on not following through with Brexit and on their immigration policies. But again, if they expect us to, we account for 74% of the military spending of this 29-member nations of NATO, and again, the biggest threat to them is Islamic terrorism, jihad, often backed and orchestrated on and off by Russia, and they coddle it. They do business with Russia, put tariffs on our stuff. Then again, they put in, Turkey, install Turkey into NATO, appease them, and Turkey now is being propped up by Russia. They work with Russia to sustain the Iran deal. They trash Israel, trash our policies towards Israel. So it's appropriate for Trump to say, like, dude, if you're going to slit your own wrists with this and bring them in, what do you want from us? That's the way I kind of read it.
The only way I could see a small issue with what the president did in that in his interview with, I think it was The Sun, the British paper, is that the situation in Britain for Theresa May, she's really on the ropes right now. And there are legitimate worries that someone like Jeremy Corbyn, the anti-Semite communist traitor, basically,